Welcome, everyone. It's good to see as people are coming in. We are live on Zoom and Facebook. Today's class, we have the pleasure of learning with the Dean of Drisha, Rabbi David Silber, in Mishnah in Depth, Masechet Yevamot. This class is a part of Drisha's Rivka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored by Rivka Rosenwein's family in her memory. This class is designed to accompany daily study of the Mishnah following the Mishnah Yomit schedule. We will meet weekly as a community of learners to augment our own independent study, enhance our understanding of the mishnayot learned, and support each other as a community of learners in the daily study of this foundational text. If you are joining on Zoom and Facebook Live, the chat will be monitored, so please feel welcome to ask questions. If you're joining on Facebook, I will be sending around a round of invitations to panelists. Please accept the invitation so that you can ask questions directly, speak, unmute yourself, and participate in the class. If you do not want to be a panelist or you're not able to join, that's fine. You can message me or use the raise hand function and I can unmute you to speak. Sources will be shared on screen from Sfaria's translation of Mishnah Yomit, but please feel welcome to follow along in whatever version of mishnayot you like. And with that, I'd like to hand things over to Rabbi Silber because I believe we have a lot planned for today.
Thank you. Okay, so I thought that today and next week, the cases in Yevamot, some of them are complicated, but I did want to just today, just to go through some of the mishnayot, to talk about the specific cases that they give, and to get some sense through the cases of some of the principles that the Mishnah is presenting us with in Masechet Yevamot. So the first 5 chapters, this week we'll do some mishnayot, next week we will complete at least through chapter 5, again, picking and choosing. And afterwards, it gets somewhat simpler, I think, in terms of the mishnayot. Some of these cases are a little complicated, and the Gemara is actually more complicated, which is why there's a general, concern or, whatever, anxiety about Masechet Yevamot. But, I mean, it's not that complicated, and we'll go through it. Let me just begin by saying we're going to look at several mishnayot that give cases. Now, let me just, before we go to the cases, just make a comment about the Mishnah, which is that the Mishnah in general gives cases. So does the Torah, for that matter. The Torah often has cases, and case law. And from the cases, we can often derive the principles. Sometimes the cases are complicated in such a way that there might be more than one principle to be derived. But we have to remember at all times that the Mishnah fundamentally, and here in Yevamot you see it all the time, giving us different cases. Now, some of these cases may seem to you to be extremely unusual cases and very unlikely to ever happen or rarely take place, and that is the truth. But the Mishnah is not necessarily interested in the practical side of things, but more in giving cases which can demonstrate principles. So without further ado, I wanted to look today at, very straightforward, look at several mishnayot, just to read the mishnayot and to see what is the principle that is derived from this particular Mishnah. Okay, so let's begin, first of all. We're going to jump around. We'll start with the second chapter. And let's begin with Mishnah number 6. Okay. Mishnah number 6. Chapter 2, Mishnah 6. And again, feel free to ask questions or whatever. So the Mishnah says, Misha kidesh achat mishtei achayot, v'eino yodea eis mehen kidesh. Okay, the case is a man marries one of 2 sisters, but he doesn't know which sister he married. Now, how could that be? Well, it certainly is possible. It's hard for us to imagine, but let's say he sent him a messenger, a shaliach, to be mekadesh a woman in his family, and the shaliach didn't remember which one it is, or which one is which. There's a mix-up. So in short, without wondering about how this could really happen, he knows he's married to one of 2 sisters, but he doesn't know which one he's married to. So the point is that he can't marry either sister, because if he sleeps with one sister, then marries her, sleeps with her, but he's really married to the other sister, then he's sleeping with his wife's sister. But your wife's sister is one of the arayot in the list of forbidden relationships. That case of wife's sister comes up over and over again in the Mishnah. Now, the wife's sister, just to remind us, there's one thing that's unusual about marrying two sisters. Two sisters is explicitly forbidden in the Torah, but the exception is the Torah says you can't marry two sisters b'chayeha. In other words, if a man marries one sister, divorces that sister, he's not allowed to marry the other sister. But if the first sister died, then he is permitted to marry the second sister. That's the unusual feature of two sisters. So if one dies, you can marry the other one. But if one is alive, then you can't marry the other one. In this case, he doesn't know who the wife is. So if it's Rachel and Leah, so he sleeps with Rachel, but maybe he's really married to Leah. Sleeping with his wife's sister, that is forbidden. So in this case, what does he do? Notain get lezev, he has to give them both a bill of divorce in order to free them up, and then they're not married, so he gives each one a get. Okay, fine. Mate. But what about the following case? This man is married to one of two sisters, and he dies. And he has a brother, and without children. So this is a yibum case. Yibum or chalitza. The problem is, he doesn't know which of them is actually the only one of them is actually the Yevamot. He's only actually married to one, but he doesn't know which one. So therefore, in this case, he has the same problem. That basically, now he's not married to the other one. So what is the principle that emerges from this Mishnah? The Mishnah says, "Mate v'lo achechad choletz l'shteihem." If he has a brother, so now you have these two women, one of whom is his Yevamah, but he doesn't know which one. So then he has to give chalitza to both. Now, why does he have to give chalitza to both? Why can't he just be miyabim one of them? Let's say Rachel and Leah. Let him marry Leah. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that the other wife might be the real wife. Because you say to yourself, what's the problem? Because b'manavshach, either way, if this is the Yevamah, so that's fine. So he's married to the Yevamah. And if it's not the Yevamah, never his wife, so she's an unmarried woman. So he's marrying an unmarried woman. What is the problem? But the problem is that the other one could be the Yevamah, in which case he was never married to her, but there exists a relationship between them called Zika. There's some kind of marriage, it's not marriage, but there's some kind of marital bond between them. You're not allowed to be miyabein, it's called achot zekukato. That's the principle of the Mishnah. So therefore, on the other hand, there is this yibum connection to one of them. He can't sleep with either one, which is marriage, but there is a connection. So he has to give each one chalitza. He can't do yibum, but chalitza is never a problem. Because what's the problem? It doesn't matter. Chalitza is nothing forbidden with the ceremony, so we can give chalitza to both. That's the first case in the Mishnah. Then the Mishnah continues. Hayu lo shnayim. Let's say this guy, the same thing. Ruvain marries either Rachel or Leah. He doesn't know which one. Then he dies. No children. And now there are two brothers. So what happens in the case of two brothers? So the Mishnah says if there are two brothers, echad choletz v'echad miyabem. So one brother does chalitza and the other brother does yibum. But it's got to be in that order, right? Because if the first brother has to do chalitza, one brother first does chalitza. He can't do yibum because he's being miyabem a woman who might be the sister of his zukuka. So he can't do yibum. Chalitza is never a problem. But once he does chalitza, then that woman is out of the picture. In other words, the zika is then completed. So therefore, if he wants to marry the second one, what is the second one is either she was never the wife in the first place, in which case, of course, he can marry her, or she actually is the wife, but she's not the sister of one who's a kuka because the other one received chalitza. So therefore, there's no problem. So therefore, echad choletz v'echad biyabem. Okay. However, what about the reverse? Kid move a konsu. If in fact they didn't do that, they did in the other order. The first guy didn't do chalitza, he did yibum, and you're not supposed to do yibum because it might be the sister of the one who is your yavama. The Mishnah says ein motziyim miyadam. If they both married, each one married a sister, then we don't, and they did it. They shouldn't have done it. But if they did it, we don't force them to get divorced. They can remain married. Now, there's a Mishnah later on which has a similar case in which the Mishnah says we do compel them to get divorced. But this particular Mishnah, you have to remember, is not a case where the man was definitely married to both. It's a situation where he might be married to both. In other words, not to both. He's not married to both. We don't know which of the two he's married to. So it's not a normal case of doing yibum with the sister of the potentially the sister of a zakuka, because we don't know that for sure the other one is zakuka. So it's a suffix, it's a doubt. So in the case of a doubt, and we have a fait accompli, he's already done yibum, then we don't compel them to get divorced. So this is the Mishnah. What is the important principle in the Mishnah? Mishnah has a case, a far-fetched case, obviously, but a case. The principle that's important for this Mishnah is the one that I mentioned at the beginning of the idea of Zika, the idea that you cannot do Yibum with someone with someone who's a sister of someone who is a kuka. Can't marry two sisters. In this case, you're not marrying two sisters, but you're doing Yibum with a woman who might be the sister of another, might be a woman, possibly, potentially, suffix, we don't know, who might be the sister of a zakuka to you. And in that case, the Mishnah says you should not permitted to do yibum, you must do chalitza. But on the other hand, if you did it, okay, if you did it, then we don't force you to get divorced. That's the principle of the Mishnah. Okay, it's a very typical Mishnah. You have a case, and there's a principle, but the Mishnah doesn't give you the principles. The Mishnah gives you the cases. Okay, so this is chapter 2, Mishnah number 6. Okay, let's jump ahead. Are there any questions about this Mishnah, first of all, or about the case?
And if you're an attendee, I can unmute you. Use the raise your hand function.
This one it's fairly clear, I think, right? Okay, let's take a look, and I'm just going to go through some cases this afternoon, just so we can get this straight. Okay, let's take a look at chapter 3.
One moment, just a quick question from the audience.
Yes.
From Justin. Can you unmute?
No, I just wanted to get promoted.
Oh, sorry. Sure, I can do that.
Okay, let's take a look at another Mishnah now. We're jumping around here. Let's take a look at chapter 3, Mishnah 1. Chapter 3, Mishnah 1. Okay, now we have another case, right? Here's the case. Arba Achim. There are 4 brothers. Okay, 4 brothers now. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. 4 brothers. Shnayim mehen nesuin shtei achayot. Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. That could happen. 2 brothers married 2 sisters. That's not impossible. So they're married to 2 sisters. Umeitu hanesuim eto achayot. And then Reuven and Shimon both died. So we got the case, 4 brothers. The first 2 are married to sisters, and they both die. So so each one requires yibum. Okay, each one requires yibum. So in this case, again, each of the women must receive chalitza to free her up to marry somebody else, but you're not permitted to do yibum. Why not? For the principle we saw in the Mishnah that we just did. Because since they're both of these women require yibum, and they're sisters, and each one is a kuka to each yavam, has a relationship to the 2 sisters. So therefore, in this case, you can't do yibum, because I'm doing yibum to a woman whose sister has Zika with me. So therefore, each of the two other brothers does chalitza and not yibum. And in this case, im kadavu v'kansu yotzi. But in this case, unlike the previous Mishnah that we saw, which is identical case except for one fact. In the previous Mishnah, the situation was that the case of the two women, only one was married to me, but I don't know which one. That's what we call suffix. So in the case of suffix, if it's a fate, if I really went ahead and did it, this guy does yibum, we say, okay, it might be totally okay, because maybe this is the wife and this yibum, the other woman's not married to him, or maybe not so. So since we don't know, so you had yibum with a woman whose sister might be zakuk to you. So in that case, we say, since we don't know, we suffix, you leave the status quo. In general, in the suffix, throughout the whole Talmud, this vast Talmud, generally speaking, the principle is when you don't know something, you keep the status quo. It's called the chazaka. That applies in areas of relationships, of laws of ishut. It applies to monetary issues. You have a question. Maybe I owe you money. Maybe I don't owe you money. It's a suffix. So what do we say? Hamotzi mechavero olav haraya. If the money's in my pocket, I keep it. Because I'm not forced to give out the money. Since it's a doubt, you keep the status quo. So the Mishnah, basically, the previous Mishnah, where there's a doubt, you did the wrong thing. Okay, but maybe you didn't. So then you don't have to get divorced. But in this Mishnah, just as a follow-up to the previous Mishnah, in kadu v'kansu yotziu, because in this case, for sure, we know for sure that the two women were both zakuk to me. So I'm not allowed to do yibum with either one, because it's the sister of one who was zakuk. Remember, Zika is a kind of, I emphasize this, it's a very important point, that the way the Mishnah and the Talmud understand it, there's a kind of relationship that exists. When a couple is married, then the relationship is called ishut. It's an actual relationship that exists. And as opposed to, there's certain cases where people get supposedly married, but there's no relationship because it's forbidden. Forbidden with an isa karet. If it's forbidden with just a law, with just a prohibition without a severe punishment of karet or mita, then in those cases, they did the wrong thing, they shouldn't stay married, but they are married in fact. So in this case, since there was Zika, the Mishnah says Yotzilu. Okay, let's get to another Mishnah now.
Just one comment.
Yes.
Just one comment from the chat. From Debbie Sondheim, the doubt
Yes.
concept reminds her of, quote, possession is 9/10 of the law.
Right. I'm not sure that in Judaism, in a certain way, it's 10/10, because the principle that the Gemara talks about is hamotzi mechavero olav haraya. If I want to extract money from you, it's incumbent on me to prove for sure that you owe me the money. But if there's a case of doubt, you leave things where they are. That applies to there's a world about. It's not just about money. It's also, you have a question about the status of a certain object, for example. Is it kosher or not kosher? And up till now, it had the presumption of it was kosher, or we know for a fact it was at some point in the past kosher. Then we say, okay, since you don't know, then there's a view that says, well, we just assume that it was kosher, it remains kosher, or if it's not kosher now, maybe we assume that it just became non-kosher, because things we generally speaking in law retain the status quo. In money, it's called the motzi mechavero olav haraya. Okay, these mishnayot are not that complicated; it's quite simple. Let's look at another Mishnah. Let's look at chapter 3, Mishnah 4. Let's look at chapter 3, Mishnah 4. Now we have another case. Chapter 3, Mishnah 4. This is now, there are three brothers. Shalosha achim. Three brothers. Shnai mehen nesuin shtei achayot, o isha ubita, o isha ubat bita, o isha ubat bina. Okay, so again, a simple case. Three brothers. Two of them are married to women that you are forbidden to marry both of them. The classic example is two sisters, but actually in the Chumash also says you can't marry a woman and her daughter, or a woman and her granddaughter, either granddaughter from her daughter or from her son. These are listed in the Torah as forbidden. Okay, and now if they died, right, the two men died, and these women now are there needs to be yibum or chalitza. You can't do yibum because, again, in this case, it's the identical principle. In this case, the two women are forbidden to marry them both. You're going to marry one of them, but the other one is zakuk to you, the zika. So you can't marry either one. It's really identical to what we learned before. Okay. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon says that in this case, you don't even need to do chalitza. The Mishnah says, according to the first view of Tanakama, chotzot v'lo mityamot. In other words, in the case of, again, let's take two sisters. So you have two sisters, and they're both, and there's an obligation to do yibum in a perfect world with each woman, but you can't do yibum with both. Since you can't do yibum with both, you can't do yibum with either, because you would be doing yibum to a woman whose sister is forbidden for you to do yibum. That's called in the zika. But in that case, the Mishnah says you're required to do chalitza. In other words, this is an important point. It's not, let's say, like the first Mishnah in the Tractate. The first Mishnah in the Tractate said there are certain women that, let's say, a man is married to two women. One of those women is my daughter. Reuven marries Shimon's daughter. Reuven has another wife. Of course, at the time, the Mishnah assumes a man can have many wives. Only Rabbeinu Gershom, much later, that says one man, one wife. But the Mishnah, you have many wives. You can have many wives. Now, the point is, but let's say, so Reuven marries Shimon's daughter, which is permissible. You can marry your brother's daughter. It's even encouraged in the Gemara. He's also married to another woman. He's married to Leah, who's his brother's daughter, and he's married to Adina. No relationship. So in that case, the Mishnah says, the first Mishnah in Yevamot, we all remember this, that in this case, there's no yibum or chalitza. There's no connection, because since my daughter is forbidden, since the daughter is forbidden to marry her father, right? And that's a severe prohibition. There's no relationship. There's no ishut. So since there's no ishut, there's no yibum. So the other woman is also exempted. That's called the tsara. The other woman, they could do yibum. The other woman is not related to me in any way. But since one of the two is a woman who's a forbidden with nisa karet, then the tsara is also permitted to remarry without anything. She goes out. No yibum and no chalitza. But in this case, in this Mishnah, where there are two sisters, okay, that fall before this third fellow. So in this case, the sister is the sister of someone who has zika, okay? But the zika, this concept of zika, does not preclude that, in other words, some relationship still exists, in the sense that she can't just walk away. She requires chalitza according to the first opinion. So achot zakuka, according to the first opinion, we call the Tana Kama, the first Tana of the Mishnah, holds that you do require chalitza. That's an important point. Chalitza is required when there's some relationship does exist. If there's no relationship, like in Mishnah number 1 of the first chapter, then there's no chalitza either. But in this case, according to the first view, there is a relationship. However, Rabbi Shimon poter, but Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon holds that the achot of a zakuka, there's no relationship whatsoever, and there's no need even for chalitza. Okay. Now the Mishnah, we just finished this Mishnah. I'll take questions in a minute. This takes us back to the first Mishnah. Let's say there are two women who are who are two women who are fall before the Yavam. But one of the two women, okay, is actually forbidden to him. In that case, Asr ba umutar ba'achota. But if one of the two sisters was related to him in a different way, okay, an Isser Erva, okay, maybe it's his mother-in-law, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, then in that case, he's permitted to marry the sister, because since the first sister is an Erva, there's no Zika. So there's just one woman. So you can marry this woman. But her sister also fell before you for Yibum? No, she didn't. Because since the sister is forbidden, that's the first Mishnah, there is no Zika. So in that case, he's permissible. He can't marry the one that's in Erva, obviously, but he can marry the sister. Then the Mishnah concludes, Isser mitzvah or Isser kedusha chotzot v'lo mityabmot. But we came across this already. But if the first woman is forbidden to him, but not with an Isser karet, with either an Isser kedusha or an Isser mitzvah, which the Mishnah explained elsewhere means that either it's a secondary relationship, that is to say, it's called mishnayot. It's only forbidden midrabanan, or it's an Isser kedusha, which means it's forbidden, but not with karet. And according to the Mishnah, then in that case, you do require chalitza, or some relationship does exist. That's what this Mishnah, it's an important Mishnah in terms of the principles. Some of them were already discussed in earlier mishnayot. Now, let me stop for a moment to take comments or questions.
We have a question in chat from Debbie Sondheim.
Yes.
Can you clarify when the term tsara is used and in what scenarios the term zika is used?
Yes, tsara and zika, two different things. A tsara literally means two women that are married to the same man are tsarot to each other. That's all that means. The first Mishnah in the Tractate, and the Mishnah over here, makes the point that in a situation where one of the women is forbidden to marry the other, because there's a serious, I give the example of the simplest example, two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven marries Shimon's daughter. Now Reuven has a second wife, called Adina. Reuven dies without children. So Shimon is not allowed to do Yibum with the first wife. That's his daughter. That's impermissible. So you would say, okay, he can't do Yibum with the first one, but let him do Yibum with the other woman, who Dina was not related to him at all. There's no relationship whatsoever. Hold on one second. I'll call you back, Alan. But the second woman's unrelated to him. Why can't he do Yibum with the second woman? So that's the first Mishnah Yevamot, that long Mishnah that says, wherever one of the two women is an Ereva, is forbidden to do Yibum, and that's what cannot do Yibum. In that case, even the Tsara, even the other wife who's not related to the Yavam, in theory she could do it. But in situations where someone is married to someone who's an Ereva on the potential Yavam, he can have 10 wives. They're all exempted from Yibum and from Chalitza. That's what a Tsara is. A Tsara simply means another wife. That's what it comes from the Torah. Chana and Penina are Tsarot. Elkanah is married to two women, and they're Tsarot. And the Torah forbids you to marry two sisters because they're Tsarot to each other during the lifetime of the sister. That's Tsarot. Zika is a different thing. Zika is a definition of the status that exists between a woman whose husband has died. So she needs Yibum or normally, she's not related, let's say. She needs Yibum or she needs Chalitza. She's not permitted to marry someone else. The Torah says that explicitly. She's called the Yevama Lashuk. That's a permit. We'll get to that. She's forbidden to marry somebody else unless she has Yibum or Chalitza. Zika is a definition of the status that exists between the prospective new husband, the Yavam, and this woman whose husband has died before anything happens. This is one of the major, you learn Tractate, you learn the Gemara in Yevamot. This is one of the major questions trying to define this intermediate status. They're not married yet. On the other hand, she can't marry somebody else. And the big question with Zika, since you asked about Zika, the question that comes up through various sugyot is the following question. Because it touches on something very basic about Yibum. How do we understand Yibum? Do we understand Yibum as a brother dies, no children, he's got a wife, he has a brother. The brother is obligated either to marry this woman called Yibum or Chalitza. He's obligated to marry her. The brother was once married to her, and now this brother is obligated to marry her. Right. The Zika means it's incumbent upon him to marry her. He has the obligation, or one of the brothers. There's another way to understand Zika, though, which is, yes, he's obligated to marry her. What he's actually doing is continuing the relationship of the previous brother. In other words, one way to understand Zika is the fact that a brother dies doesn't mean the marriage is over. It's actually a very interesting idea. That in some sense, till death do us part is not always the case. Sometimes even after death, we haven't parted yet. That's maybe one way to understand Zika. There's a very important Ramban in the Tractate, in the Gemara, who raises these two possibilities. And that has all kinds of interesting implications for other areas of law. Exactly define the status. Because there are two different ways to see it. So, but either way, Zika means the relationship. But the interesting conceptual question is it the relationship that still exists from the previous husband? The Yavam steps into the shoes, literally, of the previous husband and continues that marriage? Or no? The previous marriage ended with death. But there's an obligation to now, since he's obliged to marry her, okay, then one still might say, okay, since he's obligated to marry her and she's not allowed to marry somebody else, that itself creates a kind of relationship, that's Zika. In the first way, it's a simple way. The death of the first husband, in the case with no children, hasn't fully terminated the marriage. Those are the two conceptual possibilities of Zika. Okay? That's a very important point about Yevamot in general.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, now let us continue. Fine. Okay, let's take another Mishnah. Let's take chapter 3, Mishnah 5. Chapter 3, Mishnah 5. This is a very interesting Mishnah. There are a couple of very interesting Mishnah. Okay, another case. The Mishnah deals with cases. This is the case. Shlosha achim. Again, three brothers. Shnayim mehem nesuim shtei achayot. Again, two of the brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Okay, Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. The echad mufne, and the third guy is he's not married. It doesn't actually. I don't know why the Mishnah says he's not married. I mean, even if he were married to a non-sister, it would be the same. But okay, the Mishnah's case is he's mufne, he's panui, he's unmarried. So you got Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. Reuven marries to Leah. Shimon married to Rachel. Brother number 3 is unmarried. Fine. Now the Mishnah says, Meit echad mi ba'alei achayot. Okay, Reuven dies, no children. Reuven dies. The asa ba mufne mamar. Okay, this is actually a very important concept here. Very central concept to the Mishnah and the Gemara. And the unmarried brother did ma'amar. Mem, aleph, mem, resh. Now, what is ma'amar? So ma'amar, this is one of the big questions. This is one of the big questions. So ma'amar means the following. According to the Mishnah, and we'll get to this later on, the way Yibum works is that the wife of the deceased husband and the brother sleep together. That's Yibum. That's what it is, Yibum. The Mishnah will talk about this later. That's Yibum. They move in together, sleep together, and that's Yibum. And that's all. That's the only way to create the relationship is by sleeping together. There's no other way. But the rabbis weren't crazy about this, and the rabbis said that before they're living together, they should do ma'amar, mem aleph mem reish. What ma'amar is, maybe in a nutshell, ma'amar is basically kedushin. Now, the first Mishnah in kedushin, the very first Mishnah in Masechet kedushin, which is the last tractate in Seder Nashim, believe it or not, we would have it first, right? It's the last one. I discussed this why that is the case. Doesn't matter. So the Mishnah says the first Mishnah in kedushin, ha'isha nichnes b'shalosh drachim, kesef shtar ubiyah. You can create kedushin in three ways, says the Mishnah. Either through money, the man gives the woman something worth a pruta, or he writes her a contract, a marriage contract called a shtar. That's not a ketuva. Ketuva is something else. Marriage contract. You are married. We are married. Here's the contract. Take the contract. Marry. That works. Or they can just sleep together. Bia. Those are the three ways to create what's called kiddushin. Now remember, we have to distinguish kiddushin from nisuin. But kiddushin means they're married. Nisuin means they're living together. Or in the case of bia, maybe it does both. That's the question in the Gemara. But that's kedushin. The Gemara says in the Tractate Kedushin, it's striking. You go to a wedding, and typically in a traditional wedding, the groom gives the bride a ring. A ring means something worth a pruta. Okay, whatever it is, all kinds of rules, but that's the way typically it works. You can work with a shtar, but I've never seen that at a wedding. They give money, fine. Gemara says, but the Mishnah has three options: money, shtar, or bia. Those are the three options. The Gemara says, Rav mangid amanta mekadesh b'bia. Important Gemara. Rav mangid. Rav gave malkot. Rav punished with malkot a couple, or it says the man, but it's probably both, to mekadesh b'bia. If they created kedushin without having either kesef or shtar first, Rav disapproved, and he would give malkot. So you see that they disapprove of just two people starting to live together without kedushin. It's a very important halacha in Masechet kedushin. So over here, what mamar is a rabbinic enactment that the man should give the woman or do kedushin with the woman prior to sleeping together, prior to yibum. That's called ma'amar. Ma'amar essentially is in some kind of kedushin. Now the question is it full kedushin or not? And is there a difference between ma'amar and kedushin? That's an interesting question. Maybe we'll get to that next week. But that's what ma'amar is. So let's get the case straight. You have three brothers. The first two are married to sisters, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven dies. Shimon can't do yibum because Shimon's married to the sister, right? So Shimon can't do yibum. He's forbidden to do yibum because because he's married to a sister. And you can't be married to two sisters. But he's not married to anybody. So Levi says, I'm going to marry Leah. But before he does yibum, he does mama, which is what the Mishnah thinks is a good thing. He gives her kesef kedushin. But they haven't slept together yet. There's no yibum. Just gave her kedushin. V'yachar kach meit achiv hasheni. And then what happened? Shimon dies. So now what? So now Shimon dies, but Shimon is married to the sister of the guy that he did mama to, right? The first two brothers are married to sisters. So what do you do in this case? The first one, right? The first woman he did mama, but he didn't do yibum, and now there's another sister who is the kuka to him. So the one that he did mama to is the sister of another woman who's a kuka. So the Mishnah says, here we have Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai omrim ishto imo v'alo teitze mishum achot isha. Beit Shammai holds that mamar is full kedushin. So Beit Shammai says, okay, he already married Leah. He's married to Leah. He gave her mamar. He did kedushin, mazel tov. Now this new woman comes on the scene, Rachel, but Rachel is the sister of Leah to whom he's married. So in this case, he can't. In this case, Rachel can just leave. There's no need for yibum or no yibum. There's no need for chalitza either. It's the first mission in the tractate. She's a sister of some. She's forbidden to him with the isakaret. So there's no yibum. It says Beis Shammai, simple. There's simple. Ubeit Hillel omrim motzi et ishto begetu v'chalitza v'eshet achiv b'chalitza. Zoe sha'amru. Oiglo al ishto v'oiglo al eshet achiv. This is a very interesting Mishnah. What does Beit Hillel say? Beit Hillel says that in this case, he can't marry either of them. So what do? Why not? Why can't he marry either of them? Because Beit Hillel holds that even though Mamar sounds like Kedushin, it feels like Kedushin, but it's not Kedushin. Because Mamar for Beit Hillel is not normal Kedushin. Mamar is a step towards Yibum, that is true. It does create some kind of relationship, but it doesn't create the full relationship. And therefore, though we did Mamar to Leah, and now Rachel comes on the scene, so Rachel essentially is, Rachel is basically the sister of one who is Zakukah to him, yes, but not married to him. So therefore, what do? So Beit Hillel says the one that he did Mamar to, he has to do two things. He has to give her a get, because Mamar is like Kedushin, and Chalitza doesn't help for Kedushin. Chalitza only helps for a woman it was the status of a Yevamot. So he has to give the first one that he did Mamar to a get plus Chalitza, because the get never frees the woman up to remarry in the case of Yibum. Only Chalitza does. So the first one, he must give a get and Chalitza. And the second one, Eshet Achiv, who's the sister of the one who was Zakukah to him, it's Zakukah to each other. The other one, he never married, he didn't do Mamar, but she requires Chalitza. And then Beit Hillel said, this is the case where they said, woe to him concerning his wife, and woe to him concerning the sister of his brother. So here we have, first of all, in the Mishnah, a couple of very interesting points to remember. First of all, we have the concept of Mamar. That's a very important point, and next week we'll deal more with Mamar. Mamar is a strange kind of thing. On one hand, it's like Kedushin in the sense that if you did Mamar, even where you can't go through with the Yibum, you still require a get. Now remember about the get. Well, yes, to the question on chat, can a woman refuse all this? The answer is yes. According to the Mishnah and Gemara, a woman can refuse, I don't want to marry this guy. Let's do Chalitza. And then she can insist upon Chalitza. We'll talk more about that in the future, maybe next week or the week after, but either one, the man or the woman can refuse to do Yibum. Mamar, obviously. And then you do Chalitza. Now, what are the implications? Because the larger question is which of these two is preferred. Is Yibum preferred or is Chalitza preferred? When you look at the Chumash, it's clear that Yibum is preferred. But in the Gemara already, there's a dispute about it. There's a fascinating topic in terms of over the centuries how things change. When you come to Israel in 48 and you establish the rules for the state, all kinds of interesting problems. But in any event, this Mishnah has an important concept. First of all, Mamar. That Mamar requires a get, but most important is that there's a machloket, there's a disagreement in the Mishnah between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. That Beit Shammai thinks Mamar is full Kedushin. That's what it's Kedushin, says Beit Shammai. It's Kedushin. So therefore they're married. Beit Hillel has the interesting opinion. Normally, if you give the woman money and she consents, they're married. And even if they didn't ever live together, Kedushin creates marriage. And there's another stage where they're actually living together, chuppah, whatever, that's the suin. But Kedushin, in terms of being married, you're fully married after Kedushin. You require a get. But Beis Hillel holds that in this case, we're talking about a Yevama, the Mamar does not create full Kedushin. it creates a partial status. Again, we see over here Zika, Mamar. What fascinates the Mishnah, and we understand why, are these liminal cases, these intermediate kind of cases, and trying to pin down. The Mishnah does this in general. I mean, legal systems like cases that are on the margins. They allow us to get a clear view or a better idea of what's involved over here. Okay, this is this Mishnah. Let me take, is there any other questions now before we move to the next Mishnah? Okay, let's get to the next
questions
Mishnah.
coming up in chat.
Go ahead.
First from friend Shifrin saying the woman has no right to refusal. Fran, did I get all the context in?
The woman has every right to refuse. The woman can refuse to do Yibum. The woman, look, the woman, here's the point. Let me say briefly, comes up later, but I'll say now the following. Let's say the normal case. Man dies, has a wife, no children. So the Mishnah says you require Yibum or Chalitza. Those are the choices. Now that's a choice that either one can make. The man can say, I don't want to do Yibum, I'll do Chalitza. The woman can say, I don't like this guy, whatever, I'll do Chalitza. That they can say for sure. That's for sure. They both have that right to refuse. But without Chalitza, she can't remarry. Now the Mishnah has the cases later on. I think it's in the Mishnah, it's in the Gemara for sure. What about if the woman says, I don't want Yibum or Chalitza? What do I need it for? Now, I'm not going to remarry. I don't care about remarrying anymore. What do I care? So forget Yibum. Don't bother with Chalitza either. I'm perfectly happy to do neither. Is there some kind of idea that it's a mitzvah, you got to do one of the two? Or not? That's an interesting question. But in terms of right of refusal, they both have the right of refusal. Certainly, Mamar, you would have presumably the right of refusal because it's Kedushin. Now, Mamar, I see a question in the chat, is it a written document? Mamar is Kedushin, so typically it's not a written document. Mamar is give money. Normally Kedushin is, the first Mishnah, you give a pruta or something worth a pruta. Nowadays, they give a ring. So that's the, which is actually an ancient custom to give a ring. But the Mishnah says in the Mishnah in Kedushin, the first Mishnah, you can get married through a written contract called the shtar. So Mamar, presumably in the Mishnah, could be kesef or shtar. Could be either one. It doesn't have to be a written document. He can simply give her money. What language he would use is the question. Harez Mamar. Harez kesef Mamar. He doesn't say Kedushin, because according to Beis Hillel, it's not full Kedushin, which is why in this case, he has to give her get in Chalitza, and the other woman, Chalitza. Okay. Mamar is like, yes, it's like Kedushin. You call it betrothal. But I also want to make the point about Kedushin. Kedushin in the Mishnah and the Gemara is a full relationship of marriage. They're not living together yet. And for certain purposes, they're not married. If she dies, does he inherit her is a question. What obligations, if he's a Kohen, can she eat Truma? These kinds of questions, which will come up later in this tractate, by the way, in other contexts. But Mamar is simply a kind of Kedushin. Okay. Let's take another Mishnah here. Yes?
Just one more question from chat, which is, are there any time limits to the status of a Zika? Sounds like a woman in limbo whose husband won't grant a divorce. This is from Fran.
Right. So this is, right. So the Mishnah talks about compelling the man to do it. The Mishnah discusses this. You can't leave her in limbo. In fact, not only can you not leave her in limbo, but even where he has a seemingly valid claim, he says, the Mishnah comes later on. Mishnah says, let's say they're two brothers or three brothers, whatever it is. And the oldest brother, the mitzvah falls on the oldest. That's in the Mishnah. And the oldest brother says, you know something, she's not really for me. But my brother, my younger brother, who's overseas now, is coming back in 2 months. Why don't we wait till he gets back? Because I think that could really work. In that case, the Mishnah says, no. We say to the guy, we're not waiting for the guy to return. You do either Yibum or you do Chalitza. So the Mishnah is very aware of that. Mishnah doesn't want to leave her in limbo. Where the problem comes up from a practical matter, it comes up in the following cases, which are, unfortunately, I'm thinking about this all the time now. All these young men who fell in the war in Israel, and many of them have no children. Many are married, and if they have a brother this is an issue, how to get around this. I mean, this is a whole longer conversation. But doing Yibum and Chalitza, you have to wait till you're a gadol, which means for a boy until he's 13 years old. And you could have cases where somebody dies, unfortunately, and they have a younger sibling who's 7 years old. That's a problem, actually. That's a problem it's not a new problem. What do you do in such a case? So that's a whole other discussion about this and other kinds of cases. It's really a question that comes up in a different context in this tractate. The Tractate Yevamot, 3 of the chapters towards the end of the tractate deal with what we call today, well, not today, deal with aguna, women that are trapped in a situation where they can't remarry. So this chalitza case is one of the cases. I don't want to talk about it now, but I mean, I'm very aware of the issue. Is there a way around it? Most of these things, there is a way around it. If people, there are people working on it. I myself, I don't work on it, but I'm very aware of the problem. And when I was involved a few times in these issues, I worked hard to remove the problem. The way around it, I don't want to get into this right now, though it's an incredibly important question. But the way around these things in general is to, upon marriage, to put in conditions into the marriage which will obviate the need for yibum and for chalitza. Nowadays, no one's doing yibum anymore. The Sephardic Jews were doing yibum in 48, some of them. There was a whole discussion about what happens when you have the state of Israel. Is there one rule or there 2 rules? It's a whole interesting, fascinating discussion. So yibum is not, as a practical matter, is not happening. But chalitza is the problem. You know what? This woman hanging around for 6 years. She's a young woman. She's 20 years old. Her husband, unfortunately, died in battle. He's a hero. Died in battle. He's got a 7-year-old brother. What, are you going to wait around six years? I mean, so there are ways around it in terms of when you first get married, or even a get. In other words, one of the things that I was slightly not really involved is not true, but that we brought to people's attention is exactly this question: people going off to war. Are there ways to write conditional gittin in case I don't return, or something happens to me, or I'm wounded and not functional anymore? That retroactively they're divorced. If you're divorced, there's no chalitza, obviously. So these are theoretical questions which are not so theoretical, unfortunately. But the whole aguna thing comes up in this tractate, actually. 3 of the 3 chapters towards the end where they talk about aguna. We'll get there. I mean, I say we'll get there. The point of this class is to help people who are doing this Mishnah Yomit. It's part of our Mishnah Yomit in honor and memory of Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah project. And I really believe that the Mishnah is the way to start, really to get deeply involved in the whole Torah Shebaal Peh, the whole rabbinic tradition. The Mishnayot are very rich, and in the hour that we have, I'm just trying to pick and choose mishnayot that speak to some of the underlying concepts of the Masechet. And we're starting with Seder Nashim in this project, and Yevamot happens to be one of the trickier Masechtot. So, but in any event, we pick and choose. Okay, we still have a few minutes, so let me see if we take another Mishnah here. Let's try. Let's see, chapter 3, Mishnah number 7. Well, this is an interesting Mishnah. Okay, you asked for chapter 2. Let's try with Mishnah 7, and maybe next week. I wanted to look at the 5th parak next week, but we're going to pick and choose mishnayot. And again, I think it's important to do that just because to get some of these cases straight. So let's start with 7, and maybe if we can't do, you want 6, someone asked for 6, we can do 6 maybe next time. Let's see. The case of Mishnah number 7. I'm looking for the principles, but to get to the principles, you got to get the cases. Shlosha achim. Again, 3 brothers. Shnayim mehem nesuin shtei achayot. V'yecha nosui nochrit. Again, so the same case. There's Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. Levi is married to Nachrit. Nachrit does not mean a non-Jew. means the one that's not related to the others. That's all. And unrelated. He also could be unmarried. It wouldn't make a difference. It's the same thing. But the case is he's married to some other woman. We'll see why, actually. Meit echad mi balei achayot. Okay, so Reuven dies. No children. So then Levi has to do the yibum because Shimon's married to the sister. So Shimon can't marry his brother's Yevamot because she's the sister of his wife. But brother number 3, Levi, he's married to some other woman or Tzipora or whatever. So fine. So the konas nosoi nachrit erishta. Okay. So now Levi is married. Levi is married now. Levi marries, does yibum with Leah, Reuven's wife. Now, umeita ishto shel sheni. Now, Shimon's wife dies. Okay? Umeita ishto shel sheni. Now Shimon's wife dies. Got the case? So Shimon's wife dies. Shimon has no wife. Rachel died. V'yachar kach meit nasoi nachri. And now Levi dies. Levi dies. He has no children. Levi dies. So Levi's died. Reuben died in the beginning. So the only brother that's left is Shimon. And now the question is, but can Shimon do yibum with Levi's wife? Who is Levi's wife? Levi's wife is the former wife of Reuven, who is the former sister of Shimon's ex-wife. Shimon's wife died. So Shimon, right. So what would you say in this case? Is Shimon permitted to marry this woman? Is Shimon permitted to marry Levi's wife? What's the answer? Logically, the answer is yes. Well, yes. Why not? Why not? Because you can't marry two sisters, but he's not married, but the sister died. His own wife, the sister died. You can marry two sisters if one of them dies. You can't marry when they're alive, but she died. So the Mishnah says, surprisingly, Harezu Asura Alav Olamit. She is forbidden to marry him forever. She can never marry him. Why not? Right? But the sister after
once not allowed, then always not allowed.
Right. Because when Reuven died and his wife was up for yibum, but at that point in time, Shimon was married to the sister. So at that point in time, the wife of Reuven was forbidden to him, not only because of sisters. The wife was forbidden to him because it's his brother's wife. Your sister-in-law. You can't marry your sister-in-law whether your brother's alive or dead. This is the important point over here. Let's not forget this. There are two different restrictions going on here. With Yibum, there's always one problem, which is it's a problem that the Torah permits. The problem is that your brother died and he has a wife, but the Torah lists as one of the forbidden relationships, you can't marry your sister-in-law. You're not permitted to marry your sister-in-law, your brother's wife. That's forbidden forever. Whether brother's alive or dead, it makes no difference. Yibum is the exception to the rule. But the point is that in this particular case, when Reuven, the brother, died, and he has a wife, right? But that wife couldn't do yibum because she's the sister of his at that time was the sister of his wife. So in that case, the prohibition of brother's wife remains, and that remains forever. So now you're in a situation where she falls before Reuven for Shimon for yibum because Levi died and Shimon's own wife died. So the problem of two sisters doesn't exist. But there's a different problem. The problem is that she's a woman who was his brother's wife. And since she was his brother's wife, right, even though it was a brother's wife and under other circumstances it would have been permitted, had he not been married to Reuven's sister, Reuven's wife's sister, but he was married to the sister. So since that happens, then the other restriction is not lifted. That's what the Mishnah says. Therefore, in this case, she's forbidden, and there's no yibum, and there's no chalitza, there's nothing, and she goes out, period. So it's actually a very interesting, it's an interesting case, actually, but the principle of it is actually a very interesting principle, that in a case where the yibum can't take place because of some other restriction, Torah restriction, then what happens is that the initial prohibition of your brother's wife remains, and that remains forever. It's only sisters that the prohibition is lifted when one dies, but brother's wife is always forbidden. But what about yibum? Yibum doesn't work, because since yibum couldn't work because of the sister relationship, it doesn't work at all, and the initial relationship that's forbidden remains intact forever. That's the principle of the Mishnah. Okay, fine. This is now we have to stop at this point. So the point is that what I'm doing over here, I know this may not be the most exciting thing in the world. I think it's very interesting personally, but I do want to go through the cases because we have all these cases. So next week, we'll do a similar thing. We'll go through okay. Now, every so often, the Mishnah has all kinds of principles that are fascinating. I'll give you an example, and then we'll stop at this. I mentioned who was a mamzer, for example, comes up in the mishnayot. Now, next week, the plan is to go through all the cases through chapter 5, complete that, maybe slightly behind, and then chapter 6 has some new topics. They're related in a way, but there's another interesting question that comes up that we'll talk about maybe next time, which is, when you're talking about yibum, when can yibum take place? Because there's a problem which is found in Masechet Yevamot, but this is a problem that comes up in general about remarriage. The Mishnah will tell us that in order to do the yibum, you have to wait 3 months. And the reason for that is that you want to make sure that in case the woman is actually pregnant and then gives birth like 6 months later or whatever it is, or 7 months, you want to make sure you know whose child it is. First of all, if it actually is the child of the brother, then you shouldn't have done yibum in the first place. That's an interesting Mishnah. We'll talk about that next time, plus other mishnayot. If anybody has questions, you can always email me at dsilber@drisha.org. And looking forward to learning with you again as we move through the Masechet. Okay, so we'll stop here then.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your enthusiasm and for your good questions. And we will see if we get to your hoped for mishnayot. And if you want to learn more with Drisha this week, classes include Between Heaven and Earth with Rabbi Nati Helfgott, and on Wednesday at 7:30 in the morning with Rabbi John Kelson. You can find out more at our website at 5874.drisha.org/fall. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I hope to see you next week.